They walk among us unnoticed, not because they're invisible, but because society prefers not to see them. Why? Because intelligence, true, raw, untamed intelligence, is terrifying. They don't shout the loudest or seek attention. They observe. They listen. And when they speak, it's like a mirror held to the world, a mirror that many would rather smash than look into. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest threat to society is not ignorance, it's intelligence misunderstood." And that's what this is really about. This isn't a story of arrogance or elitism. It's about the quiet intensity of minds that see too much too clearly in a world that thrives on illusion. From the moment they're young, intelligent individuals are often labeled different, not because they don't fit in, but because they can't. They ask questions others don't. They see patterns others miss. While their peers memorize the rules, they're wondering who wrote them and why. This alone is enough to make society uneasy. It begins in the classroom. An intelligent child might challenge the teacher, not out of disrespect but genuine curiosity. Why is this the only way to solve a problem? Why does this story matter? Why are we being told to accept this version of history? These questions are rarely welcomed. Authority doesn't like being questioned, not in school, not in religion, not in government. And so, from a young age, intelligence becomes a threat to order. Jung believed that society unconsciously suppresses what it fears, and what it fears most is the individual who refuses to conform. Intelligence, in its purest form, is rebellion, not the kind that burns buildings, but the kind that dismantles assumptions, slowly, silently, with precision. But this kind of mind pays a price. The intelligent person often feels isolated, not because they want to be alone, but because shallow conversations drain them. Small talk becomes noise. They long for depth, for truth, for meaning. But those things aren't easy to come by in a world obsessed with distraction. Jung called this alienation the burden of consciousness. The more you see, the harder it is to pretend. And so intelligent people live with a kind of inner exile. They can be surrounded by others and still feel alone. Because connection, for them, isn't just about proximity, it's about understanding. And yet, society doesn't just ignore them. Sometimes it actively resents them. Why? Because intelligence disrupts. It threatens the comfort of collective belief. It doesn't settle for answers handed down by tradition or authority. It asks, "Is this true?" And then keeps digging. It sees beyond black and white. It embraces complexity, and that makes it dangerous. In a society that rewards obedience, intelligence becomes an act of defiance. You see it in the workplace. Intelligent employees who point out flaws in a system are labeled difficult, not because they're wrong, but because they're right, and right is inconvenient. You see it in politics. The thinkers, the analysts, the ones urging caution and nuance, they're sidelined for sound bites and slogans. You see it in media. The complex stories get ignored. The easy ones go viral. Jung understood this dynamic well. He said that society prefers unconscious people because they are easier to control. And intelligent people, those who are truly awake, cannot be controlled. They question propaganda. They resist manipulation. They search for inner truth rather than external approval. And so, rather than elevate them, society often isolates them, or worse, ridicules them. Think about the nerd stereotype, the weirdo, the know-it-all. These are not just innocent labels, they're defenses, ways for the majority to protect itself from the discomfort of feeling intellectually inferior. Society mocks what it doesn't understand, and it fears what it cannot mock into silence. But here's the deeper truth. What society truly fears is not intelligence itself. It's what intelligence reveals, because intelligent people, especially those who've done the hard inner work Jung spoke about, become mirrors. They reflect not just their brilliance, but the shadows of the world around them. They expose the hypocrisy, the blind spots, the unspoken rules that benefit the few at the expense of the many. That's the kind of truth most people don't want to see. So the intelligent individual must make a choice. Shrink themselves to fit into a society that resents them, or live authentically, even if it means being misunderstood. And many choose the latter, not out of pride, but out of necessity. Because once you've seen what intelligence shows you, you can't unsee it. Once you've tasted the depth of thought, the beauty of complexity, the rawness of reality, going back to shallow living feels like betrayal. But there's hope in that isolation, because intelligence doesn't have to lead to loneliness. It can lead to leadership, not the loud kind, but the transformative kind. The kind that builds quietly, questions bravely, and teaches patiently. Jung believed in individuation, the process by which a person becomes whole. And intelligence, when integrated with emotional maturity, empathy, and humility, is not just powerful, it's healing. For the individual and for society. But to get there, the intelligent person must first survive the misunderstanding, the alienation, the subtle punishments for seeing too clearly, because this isn't just about intellect. It's about courage, the courage to keep thinking in a world that punishes thought, the courage to feel deeply in a world that numbs itself, the courage to speak truth in a world built on lies. And that's what makes intelligent people scary. Not their knowledge, not their degrees, but their refusal to play along. They cannot be tamed. And that's what makes them dangerous, but also necessary. Because every time society begins to decay, every time the system cracks under its own weight, it is the intelligent ones who rebuild it, with vision, with insight, with truth, and truth is terrifying. But it's also the beginning of something better. They don't need to be the loudest in the room. In fact, most of the time they're not. They're watching, absorbing, connecting dots that others don't even see. And while everyone else is reacting, they're predicting, strategizing. They're always 2 or 3 steps ahead, not because they're trying to be, but because they can't help it. It's how their minds are wired. But that foresight, that clarity, it's not always welcome. In a group blinded by the comfort of consensus, the intelligent person becomes a disruption, a threat to the status quo. Because intelligence isn't just about IQ or academic success, it's about seeing through illusions, seeing through people, and that makes others uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable. Carl Jung warned of this discomfort. He believed that the more someone individuates, becomes their true self, the more they risk being exiled by the collective. Why? Because the collective thrives on sameness. It rewards predictability. It fears outliers. It fears those who don't just go along with the story everyone else is telling. And this fear isn't always conscious. It manifests in subtle ways. The intelligent person might be excluded from conversations, passed over for promotions, laughed, eaten behind their back, not because they've done anything wrong, but because they've seen too much, and people feel it. There's something about them that breaks the illusion, just by existing. They don't celebrate the same superficial milestones. They don't get excited by the latest trends. They don't chase the same rewards. They move differently, speak differently, think differently. And so, society doesn't quite know what to do with them. Sometimes it praises them when they invent something useful or articulate something beautiful. But even then, it often does so reluctantly, as if admiring the flower but despising the root, because if we truly celebrated intelligence, we'd have to change things. We'd have to listen more, obey less. We'd have to admit that maybe the way we've been doing things isn't the only way, and that's scary. So instead, society tells a comforting lie, that intelligent people are cold, arrogant, or impractical, that they don't understand real life, that they live in their heads. But these are just defenses, stories to protect the masses from the quiet power of those who think too deeply, because deep thought leads to deep truth, and deep truth demands deep change. Jung spoke of the shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves that we deny or repress. Intelligent people, whether they mean to or not, often confront others with their shadow, just by asking the wrong question, or refusing to laugh at the wrong joke, or pointing out the contradiction that everyone else was pretending not to notice. And people don't like having their shadows exposed. So what happens? They project. They call the intelligent person difficult, overthinking, too sensitive, too intense. They pathologize the very traits that make someone insightful, because it's easier to shame the individual than to face the truth they're pointing to. It's easier to say, "You're too much," than to admit, "I'm not ready for this conversation." So the intelligent person learns to carry a kind of mask, not a fake one, but a toned-down version of themselves. They learn to hide their sharpest insights behind soft smiles, to ask questions more gently, to speak less, even when they have more to say. Not because they're afraid, but because they've learned that truth has a cost, and that cost is misunderstanding. But here's the twist. This very resistance, the discomfort, the fear, the projections, proves just how powerful intelligence really is. Because if it weren't powerful, society wouldn't go to such lengths to suppress it. You don't silence what doesn't scare you. And intelligence scares society not just because of what it sees, but because of what it might become. An intelligent child grows up, questions everything, breaks cycles. An intelligent adult sees through media manipulation, systemic injustice, political theater. An intelligent elder refuses to die with their wisdom unspoken, even if it shakes the room. That's a threat, not to humanity, but to the systems that manipulate it. Intelligence is subversive. It doesn't wave signs and protest, though sometimes it does that too. It rewrites narratives. It breaks inherited patterns. It quietly steps out of the roles society assigns and says, "This isn't who I am." And every time someone does that, they give silent permission for others to do the same. That's what scares society, not the individual mind, but the ripple effect. Because when one person starts thinking deeply, others follow. One person breaks free from unconscious programming, and the chain reaction begins. One person questions the way things are, and suddenly the illusion begins to crack. Jung believed that society evolves only when the individual dares to become whole. And the intelligent person by nature is on that journey, often without even realizing it. But it's not an easy path. There's loneliness, misunderstanding. There are times when they wish they could unthink, unsee, unfeel. They wish they could blend in, laugh at shallow jokes, chase the easy goals, be normal. But the truth is, they were never meant to be. They're not here to follow the map. They're here to redraw it. And if you're one of them, if you've felt this tension between your mind and the world, you're not alone, you're not broken, you're not too much. You are rare. Your presence, even when misunderstood, is needed more than ever. Because we are living in a time when distraction is praised and depth is punished, when noise is profitable and silence is dangerous, when truth is filtered and conformity is sold as safety. And in times like these, intelligent people, those who refuse to trade clarity for comfort, become more than just thinkers. They become guardians of consciousness, carriers of fire. And that fire, though feared, is exactly what the world needs. They aren't trying to be heroes. In fact, many of them wish they could forget what they know, just for a day. To walk through the world without constantly analyzing, dissecting, understanding. To simply exist, like everyone else seems to. But intelligence doesn't allow for that kind of blindness. Once you see the layers beneath reality, it's impossible to go back to the surface. And this is where Jung's insights become crucial. He believed that intelligence, when undeveloped or unbalanced, could actually be dangerous, not just to society, but to the intelligent person themselves. Because intelligence without integration becomes self-destructive. It can spiral into nihilism, cynicism, arrogance, isolation. That's the shadow side. You've probably seen it. The brilliant person who alienates everyone around them, not because they're wrong, but because they lack empathy. The genius who becomes so obsessed with their own mind that they forget how to live. The thinker who sees through everything and ends up believing in nothing. That's the trap, and Jung warned of it. Because to truly individuate, to become whole, you don't just need intellect, you need balance, you need heart. You need to descend into the unconscious and face what's hiding there. Your fear, your wounds, your ego, your limits. Only then can intelligence become wisdom, and that's rare. Because society doesn't teach emotional intelligence, it teaches compliance. It doesn't reward self-awareness, it rewards performance. So even intelligent people can get lost, chasing perfection, achievements, accolades, while ignoring the internal world that Jung believed was the key to true growth. But those who do the inner work, they become unstoppable. They're not just intelligent, they're awake. Awake to themselves, awake to others, awake to the deep structures that shape human behavior. These are the people who lead revolutions, not always political ones, but psychological ones. They shift culture. They break old paradigms, not by yelling louder, but by thinking deeper and living more honestly. And yes, that honesty can be uncomfortable, because a truly intelligent person won't flatter you. They won't lie to you to make you feel safe. They won't tell you what you want to hear. They'll tell you the truth as gently as they can, but as directly as they must. And that's what makes them rare and necessary. Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But society doesn't hand you that privilege. You have to fight for it. You have to strip away the conditioning, the roles, the expectations, the need to be liked, the fear of being misunderstood. And that's a lonely road, because when you stop needing to belong to the herd starts to see you as a threat. So they'll call you names, label you, dismiss you, misinterpret you on purpose, not because you're wrong, but because if you're right, they might have to change. And most people will do anything to avoid that. But here's the thing, intelligent people don't change others by force. They change others by example, by living freely, by thinking clearly, by loving without manipulation, by choosing truth over comfort, again and again and again. And eventually, something shifts. Someone hears what they say and really listens. Someone sees how they live and begins to question their own habits. Someone watches how they carry themselves through the world and starts to wonder, what if I could be like that too? That's how transformation happens, quietly, patiently, one person at a time. This is why intelligent people are feared, but also why they are followed, resisted at first, but remembered, because deep down, everyone wants to be free. And intelligent people, especially those who've walked through their own darkness and come out whole, remind us that it's possible. They become way showers, not gurus, not saviors, just people who've dared to think for themselves, feel for themselves, decide for themselves, people who no longer need permission to be who they are. And that kind of presence, calm, clear, fearless, is magnetic, not in the flashy way, but in the quiet way that truth always is. It's not about charisma, it's about coherence, alignment, authenticity, and society doesn't know what to do with that. Because it can't be bought, can't be controlled, can't be branded, it just is, and that's power. Not power over others, but power over yourself, your mind, your emotions, your life. Carl Jung believed that the most powerful force in the world was not the state, not religion, not ideology, but the individual who had become conscious, truly conscious, of who they are, why they are, and what they're here to do. And that's why intelligent people scare society, because they remind us that change is possible, that obedience is not the only path, that the world is not as solid as it seems, and that we have more power than we've been led to believe. And that power starts with thought, not borrowed thought, not recycled slogans, not secondhand opinions, original thought, the kind that burns away illusion, that cuts through noise, that makes us uncomfortable, but also makes us free. And those who carry that, fire. Those who think deeply, feel deeply, live deeply, they may be feared. But they are also the ones who move us forward. Always. They don't wake up each day trying to dismantle illusions. They're not on a mission to shatter people's worldviews. But when intelligence is fused with authenticity, it becomes inevitable. Their mere presence becomes a disruption, not through loud rebellion, but through quiet refusal. Refusal to pretend. Refusal to conform. Refusal to betray their own perception just to make others comfortable. That's the danger. And the gift. Carl Jung didn't romanticize intelligence. He understood its weight, its solitude, its potential for destruction, but also its unmatched capacity for transformation. A sharp mind alone can destroy, but a sharp mind in harmony with the soul, that builds worlds. Society, however, doesn't like world builders. It prefers maintenance crews. It favors those who patch up the old structure, not those who ask why it's crumbling in the first place. And intelligent people? They don't bring band-aids. They bring questions. Real questions. The kind that can't be answered with cliches or convenience. What is this system built on? Why do we reward conformity over creativity? Why do we punish emotional honesty? What? Are we pretending not to know? Most people avoid these questions because they lead to discomfort, to truth, to change. But intelligent people live in that space, not because they enjoy the pain, but because the alternative is worse. Living a lie, even a comfortable one, is unbearable once you've tasted truth. And here's the part most people miss. It's not just society that fears them. Sometimes they fear themselves, because to be intelligent means to constantly wrestle with complexity, with paradox, with the burden of knowing too much, too soon, too deeply. They see the future and feel its weight. They see the flaws in systems, in people, in themselves, and carry the responsibility of understanding, often without the power to fix it. That's a quiet agony few recognize. It's not depression. Not exactly. It's not burnout, it's not bitterness, it's existential, it's spiritual. It's the ache of knowing what could be and watching what is, and still choosing to hope. That's the part that makes them extraordinary. Not the mind itself, but the choice to use it for good. To stay open, to stay soft, to stay engaged, when it would be so easy to shut down, detach, become cynical. Jung called this the integration of the shadow, the moment when a person faces the deepest darkness inside them. Not to conquer it, but to understand it, to make peace with it, to use it as fuel for growth rather than destruction. And intelligent people, when they choose this path, become not just thinkers, but healers. Not the kind who wave wands or preach peace. The kind who sit with pain, ask the hard questions, and hold space for real change. The kind who walk through the fire and come back with something worth sharing. They become rare, not in talent, but in presence. Integrity. Depth. You feel it when they speak. It's not charm, it's not performance, it's not about being impressive, it's about being real, which is more rare than genius. And in a world built on masks, the unmasked soul becomes almost alien. That's why people stare, why they follow without knowing why they both admire and fear them. Because in a single conversation, an intelligent person can shift your entire perspective. They can tilt your axis just enough that you never quite see the world the same way again. That's power. And it terrifies those who need the world to stay exactly as it is. Because the intelligent individual is a threat to the lie that this is as good as it gets, the lie that you should settle, the lie that truth is too dangerous to pursue, the lie that ignorance is bliss. But ignorance is not bliss, it's blindness. And society, for all its achievements, often prefers blindness to vision. Because vision demands responsibility, awareness demands action, consciousness demands change. So when an intelligent person walks into the room with their eyes wide open, it's jarring. It's like someone turning on a light while everyone else is sleeping. Some will wake up. Some will cover their eyes. Some will try to break the bulb, but the light changes everything. And that's what Jung wanted us to understand. Intelligence isn't just a personal trait, it's a collective disruptor. One awakened mind can ripple through an entire culture, simply by refusing to pretend. That's why intelligent people must also be courageous, because there will be pressure to dim down, to play dumb, to laugh at things that aren't funny, to nod along with lies, to speak in half-truths, to stay quiet when silence feels like betrayal. And yet, some don't. Some refuse, not because they're fearless, but because they're committed. To truth, to growth, to evolution, and that commitment, that inner vow to never trade authenticity for approval, that's what makes them powerful and dangerous. Because once someone sees clearly, they can't be manipulated. Once someone loves deeply, they can't be controlled. Once someone thinks independently, they can't be owned. So society fears them, labels them, marginalizes them, but it also needs them, because they are the ones who ask what everyone else is afraid to say. They are the ones who dream past the limits. They are the ones who say, what if there's another way? And that question, spoken by one, heard by many, can change everything. They don't choose the role of the outsider. It's given to them, slowly, subtly, over time. Every moment they choose truth over comfort, insight over illusion, authenticity over approval. They take a step further from the center. The center, after all, is where the crowd gathers. But intelligence often lives at the edges. Carl Jung knew this exile well. He didn't just write about it, he lived it. After breaking away from Freud and mainstream psychology, he entered what he called a confrontation with the unconscious. For years, he withdrew from the world, exploring his inner landscape, documenting visions, symbols, and insights in what would later be known as the Red Book, a work so intense it wasn't published until decades after his death. This wasn't madness, it was transformation. It was Jung refusing to be merely accepted by his peers. He wanted truth, not applause. And this is the paradox that intelligent people often face. The more truth they speak, the more truth they embody, the more isolated they become. Not because people don't need them, but because people aren't ready. But here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes society circles back, not immediately, not easily, but over time the ideas that were once dismissed become essential. The questions that were once mocked become foundational. The outsider becomes the reference point. Because intelligent people don't just see what is, they sense what's coming. And that's their burden and their gift. It's not always about being right, it's about being early. They see patterns before they fully form. They feel cultural shifts before the data confirms them. They notice cracks in the facade before it collapses. And when they speak, it sounds strange, until suddenly it doesn't. Then everyone wants to know how they knew. But by then, that intelligent person has usually moved on. Not out of arrogance, but because they were never trying to be validated. They were trying to understand. And understanding is a moving target. It doesn't sit still. It evolves, deepens, demands more questions, more silence, more surrender. This is why intelligent people often seem restless, not because they're unsatisfied, but because they're in dialogue with something bigger than themselves. Call it truth. Call it the unconscious. Call it the future. Whatever it is, it speaks in symbols, patterns, dreams, feelings, and they listen. They take in what most people ignore. The subtle tensions in a room, the undercurrents in a conversation, the meaning beneath the words. They gather data that can't be measured, and they use it to construct a map, a psychological map of reality that is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying, because it reveals how much we've been conditioned to accept. Liberating, because it shows how much more is possible. That's why people are drawn to them, even if they don't understand them. Because in a world full of noise, someone who actually sees, not just the world but you, is magnetic. They don't flatter your ego. They don't echo your opinions. They hold up a mirror. And if you're brave enough to look, you see not just who you are, but who you could be. That kind of presence rewires people. But here's the thing, it costs the intelligent person something too, because holding that much awareness without becoming bitter, overwhelmed, or numb requires serious internal work. It requires maturity, humility, a sense of humor, connection to something greater than intellect alone. That's why some of the most intelligent people you'll ever meet aren't the loudest, the most accomplished, or the most traditionally successful. They're the ones who've learned to carry their insights with grace, who can see the worst in humanity and still choose to believe in its potential. Jung would say they've integrated their shadow. They've looked into their own darkness and come back with compassion, not just for themselves but for everyone, because intelligence without compassion is cruelty, and compassion without intelligence is blindness. But together, they're unstoppable. They create the kind of people who don't just diagnose the sickness. In society, they bring medicine, and not everyone wants the medicine, especially if it means facing their own sickness. So they resist, they ridicule, they retreat, but the seed is planted, and one day that seed grows into a question, and that question grows into awareness, and that awareness grows into action. That's the ripple effect Jung believed in. Not change by force, but change by illumination. By example, by awakening. And awakening isn't always dramatic, sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone, thinking a thought no one else dares to think. Sometimes it looks like refusing to laugh at something cruel, or refusing to participate in something meaningless. Sometimes it looks like someone watching this video, feeling something shift, and not knowing why. That's how it begins. A thought, a pause, a new perspective, and the intelligent person, they've been there 1,000 times. They've lived through that inner friction, that silent revolution. They've survived the loneliness on the other side of awakening, and because of that, they have something to offer that no one else does. Proof. Proof that you can see the truth and not go crazy, that you can feel deeply and not be destroyed, that you can think freely and still love the world. They are proof that the mind, when integrated with the heart, doesn't just survive society's fear, it transcends it. And the more people see that, the more they begin to realize, maybe the intelligent ones weren't the threat, maybe they were the invitation.